Hello, and welcome to Voice of the Disabled, Chicagoland's only television show dedicated to disability issues. I'm Joel Margolis, your host, and normally the interviewer. Today, however, I'm alone and wish to speak to you about an idea that I have generated to increase employment amongst the disabled. We all know that employment for the disabled is a particularly thorny issue. Estimates vary, but amongst the blind and visually handicapped, a reasonable estimate is that at any one time, 75 to 80% of the visually impaired are quite simply unemployed. There are a host of other figures to document this, but we need not go into those in detail. The problem is stark, okay? I don't have a total solution, but I do believe that self-employment could be a route to help the disabled find employment by starting small firms of their own. However, this will not come easily, and it will not come without some help. In theory, of course, any individual in a free enterprise society such as the U.S. can start a business. In reality, it's not quite that simple. And for the disabled, starting a business of one's own as a solo consultant or something of that sort is particularly difficult. However, there may be a route to make this a little bit easier, a little bit more feasible. I suggest that disabled individuals form small partnerships composed of 2, 3, or 4 individuals, each of whom has a skill that's complementary to the other, and each of whom has a different disability. Okay? As a concrete example, suppose, for instance, that an architect who practiced architecture for 5, 10, 15, maybe even 20 years had a paralyzing accident of some sort and now must live life in a wheelchair. He or she can realistically no longer walk a construction site, and even visiting such a site would be difficult. They can, however, still work at a desk. Suppose, for instance, that this architect were to team up with a real estate appraiser who is now visually impaired or simply totally blind. The individual realistically can no longer do appraisals on his own or her own, but has a wealth of knowledge about real estate appraisal and probably quite a good knowledge of the real estate markets in the geographical area where he or she lives. We could add one other person. Suppose, for instance, there's someone with a background in real estate finance, such as a mortgage banker or a mortgage broker, who is now deaf or severely hearing impaired. The 3 of them taken together have a lot of skill to offer. They could very conceivably do real estate development as a trio, or they could do substantial rehabs, real estate management, a variety of things by pooling their talent. However, that leaves us with the problem of how these individuals would find each other and how they would get their start in business. The simple or facile answer to this is, oh, well, they can get on the internet and look for one another. It's not quite that simple, okay? Looking for an individual who has skills complementary to yours and who is disabled with a disability other than yours is going to be a very intensive search. In addition, okay, there's the question of needing startup capital, needing contacts, needing a variety of other resources. So how are these individuals to find each other and get going? I propose that what's needed here is a host organization, probably a not-for-profit, that would serve as a nodal point, a point at which disabled individuals who do have some real experience in the workforce, who have some real skill to offer, okay, could meet one another and discuss the possibilities for starting firms. In addition, the Nodal Point organization could offer some expertise in forming partnerships, the legal and financial aspects of it, perhaps pave the way to meeting lenders to provide some venture capital, all of that. However, this type of organization, to the best of my knowledge, does not exist at present. In short, a new organization is needed, something that would serve as a kind of incubator to help small groups of disabled individuals form firms of their own and get them off the ground, okay? How is such an organization to be formed? Funding would, of course, be needed. And realistically speaking, it's unlikely that a major donor such as the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Danforth Foundation, or the like, is going to suddenly hand out $300,000, $400,000, or $500,000 to an idea which is heretofore untested. I propose a two-step process. I propose that an existing organization, a not-for-profit, that probably helps the disabled already in some ways, serve as a kind of springboard to help a small group of disabled individuals seek a limited grant, what is often called a planning grant, to get the ball rolling. For instance, with the help of an organization such as Access Living, the Lighthouse for the Blind, or a similar organization, a small group of disabled individuals, such as myself and a few others, could search for and very possibly obtain funding on the level of perhaps $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 to pay for several individuals, each of whom to work probably on a part-time basis for 2 or perhaps 3 years, to do the extensive amount of planning and organizational construction that would be needed to build a seed organization and search for funding on a much larger scale. In short, a two-step pathway to funding. Once the organization is up and running, it might charge a modest fee, or alternately, it might conclude agreements with those seeking to form small partnerships amongst the disabled that after their business is up and running, they make a small annual payment to the organization as a form of payback, so to speak. There are a variety of routes to be pursued here, okay? It will not be easy. It will take a great deal of work. And moreover, there is no guarantee of success. In addition, this is not the pathway for every disabled person. Frankly, those who have been disabled all their lives and have little or no work experience might not find this to be the type of organizational host to meet their needs. But for the millions of disabled, and yes, there are millions, who were out in the labor force for 8, 12, 15, 20, 25 years and have seriously accumulated work experience and very real marketable skills, an organization of the sort I propose could be the golden key to revitalizing their occupational life, okay? I'm open to suggestions as to how this might be pursued. If you would like to contact me, you can reach me at my email address, beyonddisability@aol.com. Beyond Disability is spelled continuously as one word, BEYONDDISABILITY@aol.com. Please note that there are 2 letter D's in the center, okay? Please feel free to contact me if you would like to work on an effort of this sort, okay? I don't claim that my proposal will solve the problem of unemployment for all the disabled, okay? Nothing quite that grand is pictured. But with a good deal of hard work, okay, some sincere organizational sponsorship, and perhaps a little bit of luck, this might be the pathway that, in time, provides a stepping stone to employment for hundreds, perhaps someday even thousands of disabled individuals who find themselves currently, very frustratingly, out of the labor force altogether. I'm Joel Margolis, host and lead interviewer for Voice of the Disabled. I thank you for listening to me, and I hope you will join us again soon at Voice of the Disabled, shown on Saturday mornings, broadcast by CAN TV, the Chicagoland public access station. Please join us again. Thank you. And today is a member of our group, Rob Rotman.
Thank you, Joel.
For many years, a resident of Chicago, but originally from
Maquoketa, Iowa.
Now, I understand that today you want to talk to us about a personality in Maquoketa who has reached a ripe old age.
Right.
But for those of our audience who are not familiar with the geography of Iowa, where exactly is Maquoketa?
Maquoketa.
Maquoketa.
Yeah, thank you. It is in eastern Iowa, halfway between Dubuque and Davenport.
So is it along the Mississippi?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's just across the river from Illinois.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, were you born and raised in Maquoketa?
I was born and raised in Maquoketa, yeah.
Okay. And your parents had lived there for many years?
They moved there in 1950. My dad had a Studebaker dealership. Then he went over to Lincoln Mercury.
So he was an automobile dealer all his life?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And your mother was also from Iowa?
No, she was from New York City, and actually from Brooklyn and the Bronx and East Burnside Avenue.
Okay.
And so they met at a bar mitzvah, and then my mom moved to Maquoketa. And so I consider myself kind of a half-breed. I'm half Midwest and half New Yorker.
All right. And today you want to talk to us about a gentleman who I believe worked for your father?
Worked for my dad 40 years, a gentleman named Jack Gavin.
Jack Gavin.
Yeah, he was born in Cascade, which is kind of in north of Maquoketa and a little close to Dubuque, Iowa, where my dad was from.
But very much an Iowa native.
Yes, very much. He worked for my dad for 40 years as a body mechanic.
As a body mechanic, so he was doing largely repairs?
Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. And he just, I think, one of the nicest, most caring people I've ever known in my life. And one of these people, he did his job, and he raised an incredible group of children. Two of the kids, Susan and Robert, are named after my sister Sue and me.
Did he marry a young woman who was also local to that area?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And they lived in Maquoketa all their married life?
I think, yeah, pretty much. So 1964, yeah, they were married.
How many children did they have?
They have 5 children.
Okay. And he stayed with your father, Jack Gavin, literally until he retired?
Yeah, pretty much. He delivered for flowers, like part-time, but he really wasn't my dad. I think one of my fondest memories of him is when he, the day of my mom's funeral in 1969, he drove my grandmother and my aunt and uncle and my cousins in the funeral procession to my mother's grave in Dubuque. So, that kind of closeness you feel to a person. And of course, I don't want to go into it at this time, but of course, that was the day that all sorts of political ideologies came to Maquoketa, Iowa, my mom's family and
But to stick with the question of Mr. Jack Gavin, do you have any idea how he originally came to your father?
I have no idea, no.
But in any event, he did start working there. About what year did he start? About 1960?
I think, probably, yeah.
Okay. Now, was he doing body mechanics right from the beginning?
I think, yeah.
And so he was doing that all the years he worked for your father. And then he retired about?
I think 2000.
Was your father still in business at that time?
He had sold the business, yeah.
But Jack Gavin stayed on with the new owner for a while?
I think for about a year, yeah.
Okay. And Jack is now celebrating his
90th birthday. So.
90.
He was born in 1928. I hope he doesn't mind me giving away his age, but yeah.
Well, if we've mentioned he's 90, I think we already know that.
And, I guess he served in the Korean War, so.
A veteran of the United States Armed Forces. Okay.
So-
Now, is his wife still alive?
Yes, B is still alive. All of his children and his grandchildren are still
So
alive.
they've been married for,
Probably, I think 53 years.
okay, and are still together.
Yep.
That's more than we can say for some marriages.
Right, and I think just, you hear talk about small towns are mean, ugly, but, I think he's living proof that you can be a caring person and live in a small town.
Now, we have an image of an auto mechanic or a body mechanic
Right.
as a burly fellow who often has a rather rough and tumble or gruff
No,
personality.
he's very thin, and I always feel like he looks like, if people remember Howard Morris from the Andy Griffith Show, he does look like Howard Morris. And
Okay, that was the character who
of
played.
the infamous Ernest T. Bass.
I see, on the
Yeah.
Andy Griffith
Yeah,
Show.
so-
But apparently he had a kindly personality.
God,
Jack?
yep, mm-hmm.
Okay. And his children, are they all still living in that northeast Iowa
I
area?
think, yeah, pretty much. Bob, who's named after me, is works at a bank in Macokota, so he has done very well. Yeah.
Now, did Jack and his wife buy their own home in Macokota?
Yep. So they were able to do all this. Yeah.
And they're still in their own home?
Yep. I believe.
So
yeah.
despite being that advanced age, they're still living totally
Yep.
independently.
So.
Okay, well, that is more than
Thank
we
you.
can say for many people, all right?
Yeah. And I want to show a picture of him.
And you have a picture of him?
Yep.
Now, will you have to rotate that a little bit
I
to
think.
show it to the
Okay,
camera over
camera. Yep. This
And that
Mr.
is Jack Gavin, the
Yep.
man who's celebrating his 90th birthday and who worked for Rob's father for 40-some years.
As we say, Joel, as our people say, a true mensch.
A true mensch, okay. And for those of our audience who might not be acquainted with that particular Yiddish expression, mensch literally means a human being, but can you give our audience some idea of its figurative meaning?
Why don't you do that? I think you're more.
I would say that a mensch is a person who has a deep sense of integrity, someone who is not only honest, okay, but who cares about other people and who also has a strong moral sense and who, rather than being a hypocrite, lives out that moral sense in daily life. That would be my description.
Right.
Would you?
Yes, definitely.
You would agree with that one. Well, there we have it then.
Thank
The character of Jack Gavin worked for Rob's father for 40 years, a native of Iowa, and presumably not Jewish himself, but still a true mensch.
Mensch, yep.
There we have it in a nutshell.
It does take a village to raise a child, and Jack Gavin is living proof
And
of
Jack
that.
Gavin lived that out
Yep.
in his life, didn't he? Well, I want to thank you for
Thank you.
sharing that mini biography with us,
Thank you,
and
Joel.
hope that in the future you'll have some other
Great.
interesting personalities you
Will
want
do.
to share with us.
Thank you.
So I thank you for doing that
Thank
today,
you.
Rob. And in addition to thanking Rob, I thank all of you in television audience land for joining us again at Voice of the Disabled. I'm Joel Margolis, your host and lead interviewer, and I ask you to please join with us once again at Voice of the Disabled as broadcast by CAN TV on Saturday mornings. Thank you very much.